It's Thursday, April 24th, 2025. Scott Bessent lays down the law. Vice President Vance is optimistic for Ukraine. President Trump, not so much. And Dwight Schrute gets as political as I've ever heard him. Next on the AM Update.
Now it devotes disproportionate time and resources to work on climate change, gender. These issues are not the IMF.
Fair deal with China. It's going to be fair.
The explicit proposal to both the Russians and the Ukrainians, and it's time for them to either say yes or for the United States to walk away from this process.
We're also welcoming back former service members who were wrongly forced to leave the military.
La 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 la, everything's fine. Look, the economy's great. La la la, immigration's not that much of a problem.
Being Cleopatra, queen of denial.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent did his best, or at least the best he could as a homosexual economist, on a full frontal confrontation on the Marxist progressive takeover of global trade. Speaking at the Institute of International Finance, he laid down the law when it came to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank.
The IMF was once unwavering in its mission of promoting global monetary cooperation and financial stability. Now it devotes disproportionate time and resources to work on climate change, gender, and social issues. These issues are not the IMF's mission.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent went on to confront China.
China, in particular, is in need of a rebalancing. Recent data shows the Chinese economy tilting even further away from consumption toward manufacturing. China's economic system, with growth driven by manufacturing exports, will continue to create even more serious imbalances with its trading partners if the status quo is allowed to continue.
Now listen to this.
China's current economic model is built on exporting its way out of its economic troubles. It's an unsustainable model that is not only harming China, but the entire world. China needs to change.
Apparently, Treasury Secretary Bessent and Doge head honcho Elon Musk got into a shouting match recently about who should control the IRS. That's according to Axios. Again, I'll just remind you, if there are dudes fighting in the White House, one of them homosexual, though he may be in Scott Bessent's case, but if there are dudes fighting in the White House, that's usually a good thing. That's usually a good thing. You want a team of rivals, as President Trump has assembled. Speaking of Trump, he held an impromptu press gaggle outside the White House yesterday where he was asked about China.
Clarify, Mr. President, on China. Are you thinking about lowering their tariffs?
Fair deal with China. It's going to be fair.
Are you talking to them actively now?
Actively. Everything's active. Everybody wants to be a part of what we're doing. They know that they can't get away with it any longer, but they're still going to do fine. And we're going to have a country that you can be proud of, not a laughing stock all over the world for many years. You know, in 1913, they traded to the income tax system. We used to be all tariff, and we had no income tax, and we had the wealthiest country we've ever had proportionately. From about 1870 to 1913, it was all tariffs, and we had more money than anybody. They had committees how to spend the money. They had so much money they didn't know how to spend.
The White House also confirmed Trump's comments from Tuesday when he talked about reducing China's tariff rates. He wasn't talking about making those changes unilaterally. Those talks will have to happen, and those talks of lowering tariffs on China will only happen when China comes to the negotiating table. International news, Vice President J.D. Vance continued his international tour on the topic of Ukraine and Russia. He says he's optimistic, but it's put up or shut up time.
We've issued a very explicit proposal to both the Russians and the Ukrainians, and it's time for them to either say yes or for the United States to walk away from this process. We've engaged in an extraordinary amount of diplomacy, of on-the-ground work. We've really tried to understand things from the perspective of both the Ukrainians and the Russians. What do Ukrainians care the most about? What do the Russians care the most about? And I think that we've put together a very fair proposal. We're going to see if the Europeans, the Russians, and the Ukrainians are ultimately able to get this thing over the finish line. Again, I feel pretty optimistic about it. I think everybody has been negotiating in good faith, but it's now time, I think, to take if not the final step, one of the final steps, which is at a broad level, the party saying we're going to stop the killing, we're going to freeze the territorial lines at some level close to where they are today, and we're going to actually put in place the kind of long-term diplomatic settlement that hopefully will lead to long-term peace.
So Vice President J.D. Vance is optimistic that a peace deal can be reached between Ukraine and Russia. President Trump not so much, saying on a Truth Social post, quote, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is boasting on the front page of the Wall Street Journal that, quote, Ukraine will not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. There's nothing to talk about here. Trump says the statement is very harmful to the peace negotiations with Russia in that Crimea was lost years ago under the auspices of President Barack Hussein Obama and is not even a point of discussion. Nobody's asking Zelensky to recognize Crimea as Russian territory, but if he wants Crimea, why didn't they fight for it 11 years ago when it was handed over to Russia without a shot being fired? The area also houses, for many years before the Obama handover, President Trump says the statement made by Zelensky today will do nothing but prolong the killing field, and nobody wants that. We're very close to a deal, but the man with no cards to play should now finally get it done. So President Trump issuing another warning to that Ukrainian green shirt ingrate Volodymyr Zelensky, saying, hey, you better tread carefully here, Volodymyr, because we're close to a peace deal and your rhetoric isn't helping for, again, the second time in the last couple of months. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth says there are thousands of service members returning to uniform
who were wrongly forced to leave the military. More than 8,700 service members were involuntarily separated for not taking an experimental COVID-19 vaccine. Others were more informally pushed out or decided to get out. We are welcoming actively back those warriors of conscience. We've sent letters out. We're seeking them out. We want them back. They never should have been forced to come back quickly. Personnel and Readiness Department is working in real time to make that process more and more efficient, more and more direct every single day.
Whatever you feel about the second Trump administration, this is a win, and this is good and right and true and beautiful. It's the type of thing we would have never seen under a President Kamala. On the issue of the border, here's this from Fox News' Bill Malugin. The families of two teens killed by an illegal alien who crashed into them while drunk, high, and speeding at 100 miles per hour in Orange County in 2021 have been told by the state of California that their killer will be released from prison in early July, just 3.5 years into a 10-year sentence for killing the teens who both burned alive. Oscar Eduardo Ortega Anguiano, a twice-deported Mexican illegal alien, held a lengthy rap sheet prior to killing 19-year-olds Anya Varfolomeev and Nikolai Osokin in the DUI crash on the 405 freeway in Seal Beach in November of 2021. Both were U.S. citizens and they were dating. Malugin says Immigration and Customs Enforcement confirmed to him they have placed a detainer on Ortega Anguiano with the California Department of Corrections. Later on in the day, Attorney General Pam Bondi said that this act from the California Department of Corrections, just letting this illegal alien with a lengthy rap sheet who killed a couple of teenagers while he was driving drunk and high. Pam Bondi said it's unconscionable. Fortunately, later in the day, California Governor Gavin Newsom, well, his office anyway, confirmed that this illegal alien who was going to just be set free 3.5 years into a 10-year sentence, he will be placed into ICE custody once he is released. Border Czar Tom Homan called out Congress, says they need to start codifying some of the actions the Trump administration is taking unilaterally.
Absolutely. Congress needs to take action. They can solve the border crisis by simply addressing 3 laws, the TVPRA on children, the asylum laws, and the Florida Settlement Agreement. If they make those 3 changes and those 3 laws, they've solved 90% of the border problems forever.
There's Border Czar Tom Homan saying if Congress just makes 3 little tweaks to 3 separate laws, he says that solves 90% of the border problems forever. When we come back, the aforementioned Attorney General Pam Bondi is announcing an anti-Christian discrimination bias task force. Also, another former NFL player is running for Congress, and more in-depth on what FDA Commissioner Marty Makary is going to do with these food dyes. That's coming up next. Attorney General Pam Bondi says she's launching a task force in alignment with the Trump executive order looking into anti-Christian discrimination by the federal government.
The Biden administration engaged in an egregious pattern of targeting peaceful Christians while ignoring violent anti-Christian offenses. The president is right. Biden's Department of Justice abused and targeted Christians. Pro-life Christians were arrested and imprisoned for peacefully praying outside abortion clinics. The FBI spied on traditional Catholics in their parishes. President Biden declared Easter Sunday to be Transgender Day of Visibility.
Again, another thing you would have never received had there been a President Kamala Harris at the same time. Attorney General Bondi, I'm still waiting for those Epstein files. Jay Feely, a former kicker for the Arizona Cardinals in the NFL. He's been a sports commentator for CBS, has announced he's running for Congress in Arizona's 5th Congressional District to replace Andy Biggs, who's running for governor.
48 yards for Feely to win it. Kick on its way, and it is good!
This guy lasted 11 years. He's one of the best kickers ever. NFL kicker, Jay Feely. Where's Jay? Where's Jay?
Whatever he wants to do, he sets his mind to it.
For the pylon, put down!
It is with so much love, so much pride, and so much excitement for what lies ahead that I introduce to you my husband, my best friend, Jay Feely.
This isn't just a campaign. It's a mission. Join me. Let's take back our country, strengthen Arizona, finish the work that President Trump started.
That's pretty cool. That's from an announcement promo, sizzle reel, if you will. I love how he's a kicker. And in the beginning of that ad, and if I were an NFL player as well, I'd probably feature some of my highlights from my playing days too. But he's a kicker, an NFL kicker. And his ad featured him running the football into the end zone for a touchdown. That's a flex not too many former NFL kickers can say they have. FDA Commissioner Marty McCarry has more details on what he's doing and why he's banning food dyes, synthetic food dyes, from the nation's food system.
I don't think we appreciated the potential risks to human health and child health when they were first introduced. Yellow dye number 5, for example, was noted to be a bright, vibrant yellow color as the byproduct of coal tar in the coal ash, and then people decided to put it in fabric, and then they thought, well, we can put it in food. The studies have caught up with the introduction of these petroleum-based chemical food dyes, and the data doesn't look good. Studies have shown an association with ADHD. It also makes ultra-processed food look more attractive for young kids, messing with their minds where they feel full and they want more of the food. And we've got an epidemic of childhood chronic diseases, so we are erring on the safe side and moving to remove these from the U.S. food supply.
Good news. Good news. I've seen some even on the right, or at least they fashion themselves on the right, responding to claims that we need to get chemicals out of food, and responding to that claim by saying, well, if you get chemicals out of food, all the food's gonna rot on the shelves, and that's why we need to give everyone cancer and obesity. There are some people, I am convinced, who are just cheering, frothing, foaming at the mouth, cheering for this administration and every tentacle of this administration to fail. I just don't understand that. And now here's this poll of the week. I asked you, what would you consider a win in the tariff war? A, marginally better trade deals, but a clear path of decoupling from China. B, truly free trade with every trading partner, China included. C, there is no win. Or D, other, an astounding first-place victory for marginally better trade deals, but a clear path of decoupling from China. Maybe I shouldn't have poisoned the well with my analysis of this the other day, but that's what I voted for as well. I think this go around, I think we have a good chance to make a solid step in the right direction, really historic step in the right direction, even with marginally better trade deals. The historic part would be a clear path of decoupling from China. And I think that means permanent tariffs on certain sectors that China produces to encourage nearshoring or onshoring, reshoring, whatever kind of shoring you want to talk about, of critical industry back into this country. And yeah, I think Council of Economic Advisors Chairman Stephen Mirren, I think his analysis at least has to be half to 75% true, that the incidence of tariffs, when we place them on China because of their over-leveraged position in gearing their exports towards the American market, they're actually going to feel those tariffs a lot more than the American consumer is. But we are in uncharted territory here. So we're just going to have to find out and see how this plays out. In second place, B, truly free trade. With every trading partner, China included, 22.8% said that is the best win in this tariff war. C is in fourth place at 6.5%, saying there is no win. And D, 8.4% say other. And there are only a few people who really spelled out other. Exponentially says it all depends on which administration official is talking about the tariffs. That's kind of true, at least at the very beginning. Garrett says, maintain a low universal tariff of 5 to 10% on all countries, with special exclusions for certain materials and products we must import. Midterm goal of replacing income tax with tariffs. Quit selling our debt, stabilize the dollar, encourage saving over spending. Garrett, that is a well-rounded and great idea. Turn on the propaganda machine to encourage saving, because we are definitely a consumer economy. We're just kind of hand to mouth right now, and that's not good in the long term. And it's not good for China in the long term to just, as Secretary Bessent said earlier in the program today, to just continue to wipe away all their economic worries by devaluing their yuan, their currency, and increasing exports. That's not good for them long term. OG Thor says, open trade to China and ending the gold standard were Nixon's biggest mistakes. We must decouple from China. Nixon gets a bad rap, but I think on this, OG Thor, you are correct. History has shown that you are correct. Algorithmic says abolishing the federal income tax would be the best win from this tariff war. I agree with that. I don't think that's in the cards this time around, though. And finally, air analysis. Dwight Schrute from The Office, a.k.a. Rainn Wilson, the actor, joined MSNBC's Stephanie Ruhle this week to talk about media trust. Now, Rainn Wilson has done a number of interviews. I featured a clip from him talking about his experience with, I think, delivering his son or daughter, his first child, and what that meant to his faith. Now, he's not a Christian. He's a member of the Baha'i religion, and he's spoken about cultural things, political things, but he treads very lightly, and he tries not to get too partisan. Well, that's not the case in this clip, as he's talking to MSNBC's Stephanie Ruhle. This is the most political and partisan I've ever heard Dwight Schrute, a.k.a. Rainn Wilson.
40% of Americans don't trust mainstream media. Why is that? How did we get here?
Listen, we are seeing a huge loss in trust of all of our institutions. It's the media, it's medicine, it's banking. It's a huge problem because when you think about democracy and all of these pillars, they need to stand tall, they need to stand strong. And sort of losing that trust is not by accident, it's by design. If you remember when President Trump was running the first time, Steve Bannon once said, the goal is to blow the whole thing up. And so I think that you've got mistakes made or things starting to slip, while at the same time there's a concerted effort to destroy the media. Because the media, the news media, is, in my opinion, the last line of defense of holding power accountable, right? And you had a bit of a perfect storm, right? President Trump won, and tons of people were shocked or angry or frustrated, and they're tuning out. And at the same time, you have the Elon Musk media machine, because they want you to leave traditional media, and they want you to go to X, which is a bastion of misinformation, where there is no fact checking. So it's a perfect storm of people saying, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm tuning out, I'm disconnecting. And then you have a force pushing it. But even in the last 2 weeks, what we need to do is just cover what's happening in America, right? We have to cover Democrats trying to figure out what their lane is and how they're going to get back on their feet. And we have to simply cover what this White House is doing. And I think if we do that, right, there's that saying, you know, trust is gained in raindrops and it's lost in buckets. And it's not yes, you're not incorrect that the media has lost trust.
This is where I would push back. When I see this kind of insight and passion being directed at the current administration, and the lack of this kind of insight and passion being directed at the previous administration, where, again, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about left-leaning news media organizations were kind of like, la, 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 everything's fine, look, the environment's, look, the economy's great, la, 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 immigration's not that much of a problem, and really being Cleopatra, queen of denial, thank you, boom.
I would push back on immigration.
So there is Dwight Schrute, the actor. His name is Rainn Wilson. Just completely to MSNBC's Stephanie Rule saying, bless your heart, sweetie. And I know he made the caveat there. I'm not talking about you, of course. Whenever somebody says to somebody else, I'm not talking about you, they're talking about them. Rainn Wilson saying, I see just a complete double standard in the passion and insight, he says, for this administration that I did not see the last 4 years. What gives? I don't know what Rainn Wilson's story is. I don't really even pretend to understand how he arrived at that conclusion to where he is trying to be honest and looking at the world as honestly as he can. Generally speaking, I'd attribute that to a biblical worldview. He does not have a biblical worldview. He's from the Baha'i religion. Maybe he's converted recently and he's just not talking about that. But I've never heard him talk that partisan before, that politically before. And he's talked about political issues, but he's talked so in a very, not a fence-riding way, but a very respectful to both sides type of way. That's the most partisan I've ever heard him. I'd submit to you maybe an explanation for this absent biblical worldview is that the left has absolutely gone so crazy that people like Rainn Wilson, who would like to just play both sides, and that's making it sound, it takes a lot of work for somebody like Rainn Wilson, a celebrity, to make sure you're not being patronizing or disrespectful to either side. It takes a lot of work, so I don't mean to put him down for this. But I would submit that the left has gone absolutely nuts, and their media is included in that. That would be legacy media. That it's just impossible for people who really want to just have an honest view of the world, even absent a biblical worldview. It's impossible for them to ignore the propaganda at this point. What do you think about that hypothesis, that submission? Let me know at RealAMUpdate on X. Tomorrow is another Ask or Tell Me Anything. You can ask me any question you want. Tell me any news story you think needs covered on the AM Update. Make your submissions. Look for the pinned post on X at RealAMUpdate. That'll be tomorrow. Back at it again then. I'm Aaron McIntyre, and this is the AM Update.